Hi everyone. So in today's lecture, I want to briefly review some of our fossil fuel facts, and then I want to go on and really focus on some of the impacts of our use of fossil fuels. Okay? So I just wanted to point out one thing. So some of you may have recognized this from chemistry, but when in chemistry we were talking about different types of reactions, remember combustion reactions was one of those? So a combustion reaction is when you add oxygen and you get carbon dioxide and water. So when we're talking about fossil fuels, that's literally what we're talking about is burning the fossil fuel, and that's where we're getting the energy from. So we're generating heat, but here's where all the carbon dioxide is coming from. Okay, so energy is produced by burning fuels to generate heat, right? That heat then turns water into steam. The steam turns a turbine, and that's how electricity is generated. So when we talk about generation of electricity, this is what we're thinking about. Okay, so just some quick reviews. Hopefully you should already know most of this from your web quest, but I just wanted to make sure you had the basics. So when we think about coal, remember that it's the remains of terrestrial plant material that's been compacted. It's the most abundant of our fossil fuels, and 1/3 of the world's energy production is relying on coal. As I just said, it's burned to produce steam, so that's its most common use. And coal actually produces large amounts of air pollution. So coal is the most polluting of the fossil fuels. So not only do you get all that carbon dioxide, but there are also heavy metals, particulate matter, so like dust, and sulfur dioxide, and it's not listed here, but you also learn nitrogen oxides are produced as well. And we use a lot of coal, but this is also kind of a concerning problem in China and India. So as they become more industrialized, they're really relying a lot on coal-powered energy plants. So a lot of the negotiations that take place in sort of world conferences are really dealing with how China and India can industrialize, but maybe not use so much coal. And then in the process of coal formation, you know that there's different levels of coal. So this is going from sort of the lowest energy content to the highest. So peat sometimes is used, just people burn it for home heat, for instance. Lignite, subbituminous, bituminous, and anthracite. So anthracite is the highest grade of coal. It's the cleanest burning coal and the highest energy content. All right, when we're talking about crude oil or petroleum, this is the product of marine organisms, same thing, millions of years being compressed. And then when oil is actually brought to the surface, it's a mixture of many different liquids or gases. And so that needs to be refined by using oil refinery. And this is basically just a fractional distillation. So again, this might ring a bell with your chemistry. You're basically heating it, and these different liquids and gases have different boiling points. So you can separate this mixture by distillation. Okay, and here are some of the various products that you can get. So you can see there's tons of things that crude oil can be made into. And then don't forget, this is also what we wear. So all the synthetic fibers, plastics that we use, a lot of pesticides, cleaning fluids, paints, these are all derived from petrochemicals. So there's a lot of different things that we use oil for. And just so that you know, you'll come across the name OPEC. So this is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And the 5 founding members were Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. And it's since expanded. So I listed those here. The ones with the lines drawn through them are people or countries that were in OPEC but have since left OPEC. But you'll hear about that a lot in the news. OPEC does a lot to control the production and supply of oil. So what they do tends to impact oil prices. All right, and here's just an example of a distillation column. And as I said, it's just the idea that all of these different products have different boiling points. So that's how you can refine it from a mixture based on the boiling point. Okay, and then natural gas is our last fossil fuel. It's mostly methane with some other things mixed in. So methane is simply CH4. It's oftentimes formed alongside coal and oil. And compared to oil and coal, when you burn natural gas, there's actually less CO2 per unit of energy. So sometimes you'll hear natural gas being like the cleanest burning, and this is what they're referring to. So it still emits carbon dioxide, but just not as much as some of the other fossil fuels. It's transported by pipelines, and now there's a growing use of liquefied natural gas. So obviously, if you have a gas, to liquefy it, you need to cool it down. You can also do this by applying pressure, and this makes it more efficient to transport. There were some controversies. Baltimore was going to have an LNG terminal, but I looked online, and the last I could see was that this had been vetoed. But you may have heard about this in the news. And then when you were watching your Switch videos, you probably noticed that one of the benefits of natural gas is that it has a whole variety of uses. So some of you probably have natural gas in your homes that can be used for water heating your stove or oven. It can be used in vehicles. It can be used to generate electricity. So it has a variety of uses that are an advantage. Okay, and then just some other odds and ends. You saw the videos about oil shale and tar sands, synfuels, which are produced from coal. We've talked about hydraulic fracturing at various points, and you know some of the advantages and disadvantages to this. So this has really allowed the United States to increase our production of natural gas, which has really allowed us to decrease our dependence on foreign oil. So for that reasons, it's been sort of an advantage, but the disadvantages are in the how it's actually obtained. So there's chemicals that might leak and contaminate groundwater. Methane can leak into the groundwater. So you see those videos of people turning on their faucets and it catches on fire, for instance. We talked a little bit about how small earthquakes might result. So this is still a pretty controversial practice, though it's pretty prevalent in some states, especially I think Texas and some Midwest. All right, and then you also learned about some unconventional sources of oil. So we're drilling further offshore in deeper waters, for example. Okay, so what I really want to focus on now is some of the environmental impacts in a little bit more detail. Okay, and just a thought as you're going through these, impacts to the environment can be felt at any stage in this process. So it can be from the extraction, processing, storage, transportation, or actual use of the fossil fuel. And they vary depending on which fossil fuel you're talking about. Okay, so when we think about extraction, probably coal is maybe the easiest to think about. So subsurface coal mining is what you've seen in movies where you dig a shaft down underground and the coal miners go down with the lights on their head. And so this has a lot of human health impacts. You may have heard of black lung. So it's really hard to do all of this without breathing in those dust particles into your lungs, and that causes health impacts. As far as the environment goes, when you get into strip mining or mountaintop removal, you're destroying large amounts of habitat. Mountaintop removal, you're literally taking a mountain and then you're piling it up next to it. So you're also clogging up those valleys and creek beds and streams. And then as you sort of this is all made now available to the surface. When it rains and water moves through these areas, you get acid mine drainage. So this is water that becomes highly acidic, and it also contains heavy metals. So this can be very polluting for rivers and streams that it might drain into. Oil and natural gas, think of road networks, the infrastructure that has to be built. And especially when we're thinking about, let's say, on the Arctic tundra, that could have an extensive impact on that really fragile habitat. Okay, and the thought is here that as we move to more directional drilling, that at least it has a lower footprint. Again, not that it doesn't have any of these impacts, but at least a little bit lower. We talked about hydraulic fracturing on the last slide. And then oil sands, which is particularly happening in Canada, those are happening in areas of boreal forest. So it's destroying large amounts of boreal forest, kind of the same way that coal mining is destroying, let's say, large parts of the temperate deciduous forest. All right, transport and storage. So a lot of it is rail transport, so by train. Coal is often open cars, so dust blows off, for instance. Oils and pressurized tank cars. If everything's being transported by rail, there's always risks of derailment, and there have been incidents where trains derailed and then caused either pollution from things dumping or caught on fire or exploded. Methane leaks, we're finding out more and more that this is a bigger problem than we thought. So a lot of drilling for both oil and natural gas also releases methane, and this can happen at various points in that process. And so this has not been taken account of very well in the past, and we're starting to realize that there's a large amount of methane. You may remember that methane is a greenhouse gas, and it's a very potent greenhouse gas. All right, we can worry about pipeline spills. So some of these pipelines go through, again, areas, they might go under rivers. If they leak, they might contaminate groundwater. They might contaminate aquifers. So these tend to be very controversial. Over time, they can corrode. There could be vandalism or just equipment malfunction that can lead to some of these things leaking. But again, you have to think of the pros and cons. So if you're not going to use a pipeline, well, how are you going to transport it? And that may have its own risks if it goes by rail or sea. And then marine oil spills from the tankers. So I think we briefly mentioned the Exxon Valdez tanker, and then the oil platform, the Deepwater Horizon, that caused an oil spill not too long ago. All right, and then processing. So coal, here's an example, is washed with water and chemicals before it's burned. So what do you do with that? And it basically causes what's called coal slurry. And that's just stored in ponds. And if it rains a lot, those ponds can leak, spill, or fail and cause pollution. Okay. And then you also see, of course, when we use it. So all of these fossil fuels are going to release carbon dioxide, which is our major driver of greenhouse warming. And think of it, we've been removing carbon from that long-term reservoir underground. So go back to the carbon cycle. Remember, here's our reservoir, and we're basically taking it out of the reservoir, and by burning it, we're releasing that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So we're interfering with this carbon cycle. Okay, and some of these new fossil fuels that we talked about may actually make emissions worse. So oil sands are estimated to generate 14 to 20% more greenhouse gas emissions than conventional oil, and shale oil is still more polluting. And then at the same time, there's other pollutants that are released. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the next unit when we really focus on air pollution. But coal is especially polluting, though all the fossil fuels will release some of these other chemicals. Okay, all right, so we've gone through, you've done the web quest, you've watched a couple of videos, so hopefully now in your mind you can think of some advantages and disadvantages of each of the fossil fuels. All right, so you might want to even pause right now and just see like what you're thinking about for each. Like if you had to write an essay question, what would you say? All right, so the next few slides, I'm going to give you the short version, right, and quick. So we've got coal, all right, so huge supplies, but a lot of CO2 production, a lot of pollution, and high disturbance from mining, right? You can read through this. Here's oil. So again, high energy yield, can produce lots of different types of things. All right, again, high CO2 production, some reserves are difficult to get through, lots of infrastructure. All right, and here's our natural gas. So this is the cleanest burning of the fossil fuels, but there's still CO2, and we talked about hydraulic fracturing. Okay, I made it through. That's it for today. Have a great day. Bye.